So what I want to speak about this morning is that the path and the goal are one. Okay, the path and the goal are one. And this is going to perfectly bring together the two dimensions, if you like, of what we've been exploring. Right, so first of all, we've been awakening to this absolute dimension of who we are. And we've gone quite deeply, both experientially, through meditation, but also actually embodying it, expressing it, being happy, for example, being profound, being authentic, being free. And yesterday in particular we were also looking in more depth and more detail at the big no. So the big yes, the big no. See, the teaching's very simple. Right? So how does this all come together? So what I mean by the path and the goal is that what we can call the goal is this. It's our already true, complete, full, happy, liberated, deep nature. Right? So that's the goal. Right? You could say the goal is that we want to establish ourselves, we want our ongoing experience of who I am, right, to be that. Is that what you want?
Yes.
Okay. And then the path, so the goal, right, what I'm calling the goal, is always already here. Right? In this teaching. It's always already here. It's always already available in this teaching. The path is what unfolds through time. Right? It's the transformation. Oh, it's on the other model. Anyway. It's the process of transformation, of change. Right? As we observe, understand, and ultimately transcend the patterning of the ego I. You with me?
Yes.
So the goal is timeless, beyond time, always already, potentially. Well, not potentially. It is, but it's up to you, of course, it's up to you and me if we want to accept that, acknowledge that, make ourselves available to them. Of course the ego doesn't want to do that, because it wants to say, no, can't be true, can't be that simple, no, I have lots of work to do. You with me? So the path is always already here, timeless, the goal, sorry. And the path unfolds through time. As we awaken to this, we change. Or we should do. If we don't, well then you have to question, well, how deeply do you think you have awakened? You see? And so the path has to do with the transformation of the individual body-mind. So there's a famous quote which you may have heard. It comes from Teilhard de Chardin. He was a French Christian mystic of the 20th century. He was actually a very radical mystic, to the degree that he was the Catholic Church refused to allow him to publish his books, and so he only became well known after his death. And he said that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Right? You get the difference? So, is that true to all of your experience right now? You're not a human being having a spiritual experience on this wonderful retreat. You're a spiritual being having a human experience. Do you see the difference? That's the direct path. So that recognition is the direct path. I'm a spiritual being already, and I'm having a human experience. And so where the work is, the spiritual work, you could say, the path, it's about aligning the human experience, in this case Pete, in that case Tiago, Juan, Julia, right? Aligning that with the spiritual being, so that the individual becomes a clear, open, pure expression of that conscious light. Remember that image I used of the prism, right? And so the spiritual being is already conscious light, is full and complete radiance, love bliss, the source of all wisdom, all goodness, all truth, all beauty. Right? That's the light that is animating our form and all forms. Right? And then you could say our individuality, our body mind, is the prism, and then through that the light shines into this world. You with me? So if we're embracing path and goal, the awakening to the white light that we already are is not different from the process of transformation that, you could say, cleans and purifies the body mind, the prism, so that that white light can shine through your individuality in all of its colours, you see. And this is the beauty, and it's also the beauty of a teaching that embraces the whole picture, because we're all different, right? Of course, as individuals, we are all unique, right? We're not all the same, are we? We all have different characteristics, we all have different gifts, strengths, right? We all have something different to give, to express, you could say, to contribute. Right? But we'll only find out what that is when we let go of all our ideas about who I am and what I'm good at and what I'm not and what my great service is going to be. Let go of the spiritual ego. And you surrender to this radical, unbelievable, mind-blowing truth over and over and over again. And then you see what happens and what you start to embody and what you start to express. And as I said a couple of days ago, that's when you start to live a life of constant amazement. Pretty much constant. Even just sitting quietly having a cup of tea, you see. There's something, even in the most mundane moments, there's something amazing. Because you're aware, this is it. It's all here right now. You see? You're not waiting anymore for life to become complete. So this whole matter of the path and the goal becoming one is very profound. And it's really what makes this teaching work. This is where the juice is. You know that phrase for them? Where the juice is. Where the life is. Where the creative friction is. Right? The creative friction between the already free conscious light and the body-mind vehicle. The conditioned body-mind vehicle, you see. So when you engage in spiritual life for real, there's a very evolutionary creative friction. You see? And that's the burning. right? Which some of you have been experiencing. So I just want to say a little bit more about this whole matter of the direct path versus the progressive path. So in spiritual approaches, in spiritual traditions, both ancient and postmodern, and now alternative spiritual culture, you tend to get the sudden schools, that the sudden school teachers and approaches that emphasize the goal. It's here and now. Right? That's what they're emphasizing. And then you tend to get the gradual school traditions and teachers who emphasize the path. You see? So, for example, maybe some of you have heard of Krishnamurti. How many have heard of Krishnamurti? So Krishnamurti was an Indian teacher in the 20th century, and he was actually groomed. He was discovered when he was a young child, and he was groomed. He was prepared by the Theosophical Society to be the new world teacher, and he was prepared for this role. Right, and then this big organisation developed. I mean, the Theosophical Society was all over the world, and they were getting ready to proclaim Krishnamurti as the great new world teacher. And then when he was 21, he was obviously at the age where he could address the Order of the Star, it was called. So the organisation that he was going to lead, the great new spiritual revolution, was called the Order of the Star. And then he gave his first talk to several thousand people at the time. And basically he dissolved the whole thing. He dissolved the whole order. And he said, truth is a pathless land. It's a very famous statement by him. And he said, the truth cannot be organized. Now he was very radical. He was very, very radically oriented to just the goal. Goal is here and now. And so he said you don't need a guru, you don't need to do any practice, you don't need any disciplines, you don't need anything. You just need to realize what your true nature is. That was his approach. And it was kind of a paradox, because he was always saying, look, I am not the master, I am not the guru. He would refer to himself as the speaker. The speaker is, But of course he was travelling around the world for decades teaching, and people were coming, often in their thousands. So there was a way he wanted to deny his own function. But he was a very extreme example. And then you have other teachers and approaches that emphasize the practice. Their message is, do the practice. So someone who's very famous, like Thich Nhat Hanh, for example, right? You usually find these individuals or these masters in the traditions. And what do they emphasize? Discipline, practice, be mindful, eat a clean diet, buy the right things, be conscious, conserve your sexuality, There's a whole path of discipline and practice. And the idea is, if you really discipline the body-mind, and you say your prayers and you do your meditation and you go through all your different initiations, all the different levels, then eventually, but probably not in this life, but eventually you will reach the goal, and maybe in the next 7 lifetimes, which is very good. So you find this mostly in the traditions. So you have the Southern school approaches. I mean, even in a school of Buddhism. So Buddhism has many different schools. Zen Buddhism, right? Even within Zen Buddhism, you have the Rinzai sect and the Soto sect, and one of them the Rinzai emphasizes the sudden enlightenment, and the Soto emphasizes the gradual. You see, so it's very common, this one bias towards one or the other. Now, so what we're about, what we're endeavouring to embrace in our teaching, and also in our work together with those who get involved with the project, is both at the same time. You see, both at the same time. Why is that important? Because if the bias is too much toward the goal, right? If it's too much toward, well, I'm always already free, you see, then we can bypass or subtly avoid dealing with this. Well, that's not really who I am. Yeah, but what about, that was really selfish and that was a nasty thing he did. And yeah, but it's not really who I am. That was just my tendencies playing out. You see, now even if you wouldn't say such a thing, inwardly you can start to believe this kind of thing. Oh, that wasn't really me. You see? So this is very common actually in the West nowadays, with a lot of the Eastern Enlightenment teachings coming to the West. And a lot of the teachers tend to emphasize this: be here now, you're always already free. And then they're just like, yeah, and go back to your life, just go about your life. And people can get into this kind of enlightened delusion where you believe or think, because you've experienced something profound, that you've transcended your ego more than you actually have. You see? And often the teachings or the teachers of the Southern school, they don't emphasize discipline, they don't emphasize commitment, they don't emphasize that enlightenment has implications in time and space. In fact, some of these teachers will even say it doesn't have any particular meaning or impact in terms of living a human life. Some of them even say you can't really tell if someone's enlightened or not from how they are and what they do, because it's all an inner subjective matter. Do you see? So you see how that leaves a lot of room for like, well, how can we know, really? It leaves a lot of room for delusion, and what's often called the spiritual bypass. So if you want to look at this in terms of the chakras, the subtle anatomy, it's like what we value is, the conscious light, if you like, and then let's just go around and avoid all that stuff. We'll just stay up there. You see? So that's the danger of only the too much emphasis on the goal. Now, of course, I think it's pretty obvious, if there's too much emphasis on the path, then it tends to perpetuate seeking. You see? Because those teachings tend to say, yes, this is possible. Yeah? But who you really are is just a miserable little ego with all of your stuff and all of your karma. And so you need to work hard and do your disciplines and be a good boy and be a good girl. Do what the priest says or what the spiritual teacher says. And gradually, over time, a little bit more more dust will fall away from the mirror. Do you see? But meanwhile, the seeker feels very secure because I'm on a path, and maybe it's a path that's been going for thousands of years, and I'm doing my practice, and I'm a good boy and a good girl. I'm really doing it. But there's no awakening to the radical immediacy of always already, and oh my God, maybe this isn't even real. You see? You see? So do you get how the danger of only being biased towards one or the other? Right? So you could say if there's too much bias towards the goal, we want to take heaven by storm. You know what that phrase means? We just want to, we're only interested in the light. Right? We don't want to confront the heat, the burning. And if we're too much invested in the path, being the seeker, well, we might be very willing to kind of confront the burning. But, you know, we kind of, even though it might be hot and uncomfortable, we're kind of happy to stay there, because at least I know who I am. Do you see? And this is, you know, this is where you can spend endless years, you know, getting clearer and clearer about your ego, and yeah, I do this and I do that, and it can become a form of kind of ego psychotherapy. A lot of spiritual people often get into a form of spiritual psychotherapy, where they're constantly working on themselves. You see? It's a bit like there's the garbage can, right? With the ego, and then you take the lid off. Well, there's a lot to go through here. There's no, whoa, look at that. See, but the thing is, what they don't realise is it's a bottomless pit. And as long as you're in there looking for this, you're going to find more. Well, still not enlightened yet. I'm working hard. I've been doing this for decades. So to live this, to live what we're sharing with you, you see, we have to be willing to embrace both right now. Because they're both potentially here right now in our experience every moment. Right? Now, we may experience moments, and I hope you've been experiencing a lot of them on this retreat, where the presence of the self-contraction is completely gone, it's completely absent, right? Then you are free, you are enlightened, you are awake. But in any moment that might arise, maybe not, we have to leave room for that possibility, but in any moment that this contraction, in whichever form it takes, arises, right? Whether it's very gross and very obvious, fear, for example, or just a little subtle kind of, I think I'm quite enlightened now. You know what I mean? You start to take a subtle position in the actual, I am that. You see? So the ego can be very sneaky. So the work of what's often called self-realization, right, making it real, is to never forget who we always already are, and from that place, this is ideally, to face, to observe, to face, to understand, and potentially transcend whatever arises in any moment that contracts and inhibits the expression of that conscious light as ourselves. You with me? So sometimes it can be very quick and very easy. Like maybe you've noticed in some of these groups, you notice fear arise or some kind of, is it going to be? And then you just go, I'm not going to go with that, and you respond. And you're free, right, immediately. But then you're almost definitely going to find, if you haven't already, that we all have deep patterns, karmic conditioning. This is the word karma is often used in these, that repeat themselves, right? Repeat themselves. It's the repeating stories we tell ourselves, the repeating ideas, the repeating emotions that arise when that happens, or when someone presses that button, same reaction, right? So with these deeper patterns, they're not just going to go away. when you observe and transcend them in one moment, they're going to be back again. You see? And so this is where we all have to have humility. And the challenge is, of course, when a pattern repeats itself, not to fall back into like, oh God, it's so hard for me. Here it is again. I'm such an egomaniac. You know what I mean? Shame, victimizing. You see? It's like, no, okay, here it is again. This is not easy, right? Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's easy. But if the whole spiritual process was supposed to be easy, well, we'd live in a very different world, wouldn't we? So you have to let go of this idea that it should be easy, or when it's not easy, there's something wrong. No, it's just getting a bit hot. You see? And so the heat is when we it's the sizzling, and you've got the frying pan. The onions, right? So the onion's a good metaphor, because you could say that the ego's like an onion, right? It's not really there, because in the centre of the onion there's nothing, right? But then there's all these apparent layers. And you take off one layer and you put it in the frying pan. So that's a metaphor for like, okay, I'm just going to burn through that, right? And as I said, sometimes it's very immediate, sometimes it's like you might have to cook in that for a day, a week, a month, a year, years. And then you'll get down to the deeper and deeper patterns and layers, right? And you'll look back. This is the path. This is the process. When you've been involved in this for a while, for real, you'll look back to how you were a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and you go, wow, I have learned so much, and I have changed so much, and my experience of myself is so radically different, right? And more free, and all of that. Right? But then, what are you going to be burning in the fire now? Shh, you see? It's the deeper patterns, you see. So you could say there's a kind of, the onion's a good metaphor in that sense. Now, of course, at the same time, you can burn through all the patterns right now. You see how you have to hold both? That's also possible. And you've also been experiencing that to whatever degree. So the onion is an illusion. Right? The Southern School teachings, they only emphasize that it's an illusion. Right? But it's only an illusion if you're really free of it. You see? Because if you're believing it, if you're identifying with it, well then it might still be an illusion, absolutely, but it's having very real effects on you and in the world that cannot be denied. Right? So we have to embrace relative reality here. And that's what a lot of the Southern School teachers don't want to do. Right? You're with me so far? Yeah. So this is the path and the goal. It's the interpenetration of the absolute with the relative. Get that? So, and this is quite subtle to understand, because the absolute and the relative are not two. They're not two. Right? If we only see and perceive from the absolute truth, there are no distinctions. Everything is that. As I was also saying, all of this, everything that's arising is consciousness. There are no distinctions. But within that absolute, which is ultimately all there is, all of this is arising. Right? The world of the many, the world of time and space. So if the absolute is going to interpenetrate and have an impact, a transformative impact on time and space, and beings arising in time and space, then the relative has to be embraced and interpenetrated with that light. Do you see? And only then does the light of the Absolute come into this world. You with me? So, another way to understand this is the bias towards just the Absolute being reality. We could say that's a movement of ascent, right? Up and out of here. Even though the Absolute is, of course, here. But if there's still some kind of motive of escape from, we will want to go up and out. You see? Now that orientation, we could say, is the Eastern orientation. That's the orientation of traditional Eastern culture. And so the traditions of Taoism, Buddhism, Vedanta, and you see it in Christianity too, because Christianity came out of the Middle East. And according to a lot of evidence, Jesus went to India, actually. But that's another story. But my point is that, as I was saying before, the orientation of most traditional spirituality is up and out. Okay? That's let's say the Eastern orientation. Now the Western orientation, we are all products culturally of the West. And of course the West is now colonizing the whole globe. So even in the Eastern countries, the Western mentality is taking over. But the Western mind or orientation is down and out. Because what is of value to the Western psyche is this world, is the world of matter, of form, of being here and making this better. So it's actually very recent. It's only like 500 years or so since the European Renaissance. Before that time, in medieval times, there was not really a concept really of making this world better. You know, it was the Roman Catholic Church. You know, they took over from the Roman Empire. Remember, so they found out they couldn't rule anymore by the sword. You know, it was getting too complex. So now let's Christianity, great. Let's call it the Holy Roman Empire, and we'll rule by priesthoods and beliefs, and they create this whole cosmology. And this is often called the Dark Ages. Have you heard this? Medieval times. I mean, centuries where not a lot of evolution was really occurring, as far as we know. And then we had this explosion with the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, which has obviously continued. And when I was talking before about us being individuated, you know, if we were living in medieval times, or we were disciples of the Buddha 2,500 years ago, our experience of being who we are would be completely different. Very, 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 very different. We have a much more sophisticated sense of being an individual. Much more sophisticated mind. You see? We have rationality. We have the capacity to think for ourselves, to discern. Do you see? This is all very recent in Western history, you know, 300 or 400 years old. So why is this important? Because what you have these days, of course, because Christianity, for those who people like us, it doesn't meet what we're looking for. And then many of us get interested in Eastern spiritual teachings and all of these enlightenment teachings that have come from the East. And as I was saying, the Eastern teachings tend to have this up and out orientation. But there's something about us, particularly as Westerners, you see, where there's also this down and out, you see. And so when we actually, for those of us who tend to want to escape, you know, when we actually transcend this seeking impulse and we actually realize, no, this is God. Right? God, the divine reality, is already here. Right? Is already here. And we start to recognize that our passion to create, to express, right, to change, is God, Spirit, the divine reality, coming through this bodily human form. Okay? Do you see, then we start to bring it all together, you see, because there's the movement of ascent, the discovery of already free perfection, and then there's bringing that into manifestation. There's the awakening of passion and sacrificial love, as we talked about in our group yesterday. So you could say that this teaching is about East meeting West. The East and the Western orientation becoming one. You with me? I just want to say one other thing about this, because I think for all of us, Westerners and sensitive, educated Westerners, we're all very concerned about what's happening in our world, right? In all the ways we are in, you could say, an evolutionary crisis. Ecological crisis, political, social crisis, you know. We're living in a very interesting time. And it's not that there haven't been interesting times before, and that the world hasn't always been a mess, you know, in terms of human ego and all of that. But now things are at a point where, because there's so many of us, and because we have this technology that is far in advance of our spiritual and moral development as a race, right? There's a sense of great peril, yeah, great crisis. So the Western mind tends to, because the orientation is this world is what's real, you see. There's often a fundamental sense, even in people who've awakened quite deeply spiritually, there's often a fundamental sense that there's something wrong with this, you see. The divine is not here. The divine's in here. When I close my eyes and I meditate, I can find the divine subjectively, but out here, there's something terribly wrong. Can you all relate to that? Can you all relate to that? So potentially this teaching, if you contemplate it and start to embrace it, and also if you start, when you open your eyes, you see, when you've discovered that stillness, that peace, and you actually open your eyes and you realize all of this is arising in me. It's not out there, you see. Then you become more and more grounded in the recognition the divine is already here, even in this crazy world, right? Where there's all this pain, terrible pain and crisis going on. The divine is already here. You see, for example, in Christianity, the way it's developed, the message is the divine is not here. You see, we're all original sinners. You see? So the positive message of the East is no, it's already here. Do you see? Are you with me? Even in the face of all this chaos and complexity. So the more you become grounded in that, then potentially you can embrace all the chaos and complexity and allow yourself to feel the pain, and then find that you can respond creatively to it. Right? Actually bring the light into this world, but not from a place of presuming that it's not already here. But actually through your expression, as Cynthia was emphasizing yesterday so beautifully, being happy. It can sound a bit like superficial, but you see, that's what's needed in the world. That's what has a bigger impact than being an environmental activist who might be doing all kinds of good things out there. But in terms of your psyche, you're basically in a state of anger, despair. There's something wrong. We're all transmitters, you see. We're all transmitting something. We're all transmitting who we believe ourselves to be into the world. So if you really embrace the totality of path and goal in the way I'm saying, then potentially you can be completely free of the world. In other words, you're not waiting for the world to change for you to be free and full and creatively yourself. Right? You're not dependent on any particular result. Right? But at the same time, you'll be giving everything you've got, every breath, every drop of blood, to make this world a reflection of the perfection that you have seen. You see? You can be completely engaged here, passionately engaged, and at the same time free from the whole thing. That's the potential. And if you look at yourself, you'll probably see that you either tend to not want to be engaged, by nature, by tendency, or you tend to want to be engaged, and feel it's important and get very into doing and all of that. And then you can get a sense of which one you need to lean into. You see what I mean? It's not the same for everyone. Also, another thing you can just look at right now, in terms of the goal, the direct path, liberation is here and now, right? Radical immediacy, and the path. Well, there's purification to do, practice to do. Just see which one you tend intuitively to gravitate towards, and you'll probably then you'll be able to see that by nature you either tend to be more of a revolutionary or you tend to be more of a conformist. Yeah? Just by nature. You're more of a revolutionary or you're more of a conformist. Now, neither of them is better than the other, you see. Because when you bring the path and goal together, it's both. Because it's embracing that revolutionary, radical spirit of life. There is no limitation. Anything is possible. I don't know who I am, but I'm finding out right now who I am. Radical openness. But in that, you are conformed, you are in submission to something that transcends your individuality. You see? You see, that's how they both come together. So maybe just sit with that a bit, just get a sense of, do you tend to be a spectator? More of a passive, you prefer to stand back from life? Or do you pretend to be someone who's just kind of dives in, gets involved and maybe loses the bigger picture? And of course the person who tends to be a spectator, you tend to be a bit dissociated. You know what I mean? A bit cut off. And then also see, do you tend to be more of a revolutionary at heart? Like anything's possible? I just, when you think of your life and what you want life to be, You know? Do you feel like the last thing you want to do is live a mediocre life? Right? Or do you tend to appreciate structure and discipline, and you're attracted by the idea of giving yourself to a tradition, for example, something that's time-honored, you know, something you can rely on. You see? Again, it's not that one's better than the other, so just feel into that. Okay, has everybody felt into that? Mm-hmm. All right. So so raise your hand if you're more of a transcender, more of a by nature, that you tend to sit back. You just tend to not want to be so involved. So so there's a certain sense of detachment and also being in touch with the bigger picture. Okay, good. So then put your hand up if by nature you tend to be someone who's just like wants to get engaged and involved and busy and active. Okay, good. So it's about half and half.
Can we be both?
Yeah. Well, this is why you have to. Of course, we're always, there's both. But if you really look, you'll find that by nature, you will tend to be one or the other. And what about who by nature is a revolutionary? Who by nature is a conformist? Okay. Interesting, huh? So what I'm pointing at there, that all that indicates is what your inclination is by character, right? It's not like one's more egoic than the other, right? But it can help you get a sense of, well, yeah, I need to lean the other way. That's where I need to take risks.
Do you mean that we have to embrace the other one, or do we have to really embrace what we already feel that we are?
No, you be who you are, because who we are by inclination is who we are. So what I'm saying, as I say it again, it's not necessarily ego. Mm-hmm. It's just your inclination as an individual. Mm-hmm. But it means that you want to be interested in leaning into where you feel more uncomfortable. Do you see? Where you need to take risk. Okay, so one last thing to finish. There's no real light without heat. That's the understanding that kind of brings this all together. There's no real light without heat. So we all have to burn. And even when the light gets very, very bright, maybe you have to deal with less of this, right, over time. You're still going to be burning. You're still going to be burning up because there's the whole world to enlighten. It's not just about enlightening yourself. You see, isn't that a radical thought? There's no end to this. If we embrace the whole picture, there's no end to it. There's no final state. Ta-da! Being, consciousness, bliss, no more ego anymore. Not in this teaching, it's not like that. So you have to let go of wanting to get to that place. So a lot of people are like, I can't wait to get to that place when it's all over, and I don't have to feel any more heat. When you really, there was a point where I really let go of that, and that was probably the most radical shift I ever experienced in terms of my life and everything changing. Because it was really letting go of it's not Is really realizing, even though I knew it, I understood it intellectually, but it was really letting in all the way. It's never been about me. It's never been about me and my enlightenment. Because there's nobody here to get enlightened anyway. You see. And it's finally, I just threw that whole thing out the window. And it didn't happen. It wasn't easy. I can tell you. I went through a lot of heat over many years. But I just want to share it with you because that's where this is ultimately leading if you're really serious about it. It's for the sake of the whole. It's not for your own sake. You'll experience happiness, joy, more happiness, joy, freedom, creative liberation, and a tremendous sense of purpose. Right? You'll experience all of that. But in a way, it's all byproducts. Because you're giving yourself to something that completely transcends your own life. You see? That's what it really means to let go of seeking. Wanting it for me.